Hello, my name is Daniel Pearse. I'm the Executive Pastry Chef here at the Savoy Hotel in London. Today I am going to make for you a chocolate texture, which is one of our signature dishes that we serve at the hotel. It is a chocolate sweet paste tart, which is filled with a Cara Crakine, which is like a biscuity sort of texture, mixed with chocolate, and we're using some hazelnut paste, and we're going to make it ourselves. And we're using paste, not praline, because praline has a lot of sugar inside of it, and we're trying to reduce the amount of sugar that we're using inside of our sweets. Because just because it's a sweet doesn't mean it has to be sweet, which is kind of something that I really work towards normally. It's then topped with a chocolate cremeux, which is a type of chocolate custard. And then once that layer has set, we top that with a chocolate mousse, which is glazed inside a hazelnut gianduja glaze. And then it's finished with some chocolate petals or some chocolate shards, which we're going to make together today to decorate around the outside. So the sweet paste, we start with making the sweet paste. Now we're going to use the rubbing in method. There are two types of methods when you're making sweet paste. Today we're going to make the rubbing in method. So we're going to take the butter, we're going to cut it up into small pieces so that when it mixes with the flour, it's going to coat each layer of a bit of fat is going to be coated with flour. That will help to give you a nice short, crisp consistency when it's finished baking. We then, once all the flour is mixed in with the butter, we're going to add in our wet ingredients and bind it together to a dough. The dough will then be rolled out and left to chill in the fridge for 20 minutes to half an hour so that it starts to relax. Then we'll cut out the dough and we'll line our tart rings. We'll bake our tart at about 170–175 degrees, depending on your oven, for about 10 to 12 minutes until they're golden brown. Take it out and we're going to wipe the inside of the tart case with a little bit of egg yolk, and that's going to help give it an extra sealing, so that if there's any holes in there, small tiny little holes, you're not going to see them, and the liquid when we put inside is not going to run out. Okay? If you're overworking your dough, you can then take because basically your pastry is made up with flour, which contains a lot of gluten. If you're overworking your gluten, it becomes tougher. So really what we're looking for is light hands, cold hands. When I first started cooking, they always used to say to me, you need cold hands to be a pastry chef. I don't necessarily have very cold hands, but I've got a cold KitchenAid, which does the same job. If you are making it by hand, you want cold hands, okay? Because you want to keep the butter from melting. Once your butter has melted, you can't make a decent quality pastry. You need your butter to be cold pieces. So when we bake our tart cakes, normally and traditionally, what I was taught was to blind bake your tart, which would be to line it with a little bit of rice or some cooking beans, or something which is going to conduct the heat. Now, a trick that I've learned in recent years is that if you leave your tart case outside at room temperature for 1 hour after lining it, that it's not such a shock to the pastry, therefore it does not shrink so much. You can still blind bake if that makes you happy, there's no problem, it will still work. But this method, you don't need to put any rice inside, so there's no risk of the bag splitting or anything falling out and piercing a hole inside the pastry. You'll see later on what we do it. If I put it from the fridge to the oven, it's like putting a cold steak in a frying pan. It shocks it. So we're really letting it come up to temperature, and then we're going to bake it at 1 hour. We're going to bake it after it's rested for 1 hour at room temperature. I don't necessarily like to use a lot of sugar in my cooking, so therefore what I'm trying to do is reduce where you would normally get sugar. I'm going to reduce the sugar content where I can. So in this situation, you could use hazelnut praline. Praline is different ways of making it, but traditionally it's sugar, half nut, or half amount of sugar to nut rather, caramelized, cooked, blitzed. We have praline. It's beautiful, I love it, but for this recipe, I want the nutty flake to come out. So we're roasting our hazelnuts until they're roasted and golden brown, just about 8 to 10 minutes in a medium hot oven at about 180 degrees. And then we're going to blitz them to a paste. We can season it with a touch of salt to help bring out another flavour, because salt is very important even in pastry. It gets the back of your mouth when you're eating it, and it starts to produce saliva. And saliva makes your mouth water, and that makes it taste even better. So we're using Cara Crakine in the base of our tart as well as the hazelnut paste, which adds another texture. This dish is called chocolate textures. So Cara Crakine is a product which we use from cocoa berry. It's like, closest I can say is a little bit like Malteser. It's lots of little pieces of biscuit bound together with like a nice chocolate flavour, milk chocolate, sorry. And then with the hazelnut paste as well, it's all together, it adds a beautiful texture at the bottom of our tart case. So a chocolate cremeux, chocolate custard essentially, not to make it overly complicated. We make a cremeux glaze using our milk and our egg yolks and our sugar, and we pour this, we take it up to 83 degrees when we're cooking it on the stove. We then pour that over our chocolate. In this case we're using lunga, which is another product from cocoa berry. It's a milk chocolate, but you can use pretty much any chocolate really. A high percentage of cocoa is needed. So if you're having a chocolate, a milk chocolate which has got a low percentage of cocoa, you want to try and increase that where possible. Either use a different variety, or if you need to add a little bit more dark chocolate in there to help balance it, because the cocoa mass and will help the product to set at the end. Is what we're looking for it to do, and that's going to provide the top layer of our chocolate tart. So as you're going through it, it's a nice soft custard consistency. So at that point, the egg yolks have cooked. And that's when the egg yolks have cooked, they've thickened, and that's what we're looking for. We're looking for that thickness in the consistency of the custard before we pour it over our anglaise. Too thin, the egg yolks aren't cooked, your consistency when it's finished will be completely different. The next level of our tart, we're going to make a chocolate mousse. So we're working with different sorts of chocolates. We're adding different textures, we're adding different bitterness levels. So when you're eating all this together, and you go from the top to the bottom, you're going to end up with a lot of different flavours going through your mouth, but they marry very, very nice together. So our chocolate mousse, we're making a cremeux glaze mousse, which means that very similar to the cremeux, we would make a cremeux glaze, pour this over our chocolate, melt it together, emulsify it together, and then when it reaches around 35 to 40 degrees, we'll whip our cream and I'll fold our cream through. We do that at that temperature because if it's any hotter, you'll melt the fats inside your cream and then you'll lose the volume that you're trying to obtain. So that's why it's important. We freeze that, and once it's been frozen, we'll then make our glaze, and we're going to then glaze our chocolate mousses when they're finished. When I designed this dish, I wanted the whole thing to be vegetarian. I think, nowadays I want to make sure that our food reaches as many different people as we possibly can. So this opportunity to make a glaze, normally you'd have a glaze, you'd have gelatine inside of it. So we've made this glaze using Absolute Crystal, which is a product from Verona. And we've used, again, our hazelnut paste that we've made, again, not adding any more sugar than we needed to. And it's mixed with chocolate and a little bit of cream. And we mix all these ingredients together, and we use this to glaze our chocolate mousse. We glaze it around about 35 to 40 degrees as well, because we don't want it to be too thin, so when it pour it over the frozen mousse, it's not going to run off the sides of the mousse. So Absolute Crystal is similar to a jam, I suppose. It's a mixture of water and pectin, so that when you mix that together with your chocolate and your nut paste, that's what's really going to set your glaze. We are going to decorate it with some chocolate petals. So we're going to temper two different types of chocolate. We're going to temper some dark chocolate, and we're using fleur de coeur today, which is a 70% chocolate from cocoa berry. It's got a nice, beautiful, bitter texture, a taste to it. And then we're using a caramelized zephyr, which is a caramelized white chocolate, which has a natural saltiness flavour, which again, like I spoke about before, the saltiness helps to cleanse your palate, which is very important in cuisine. Therefore, you don't need to drink lots of water. And it's those two things we're going to temper together. I'm going to try tempering in two different ways to teach you two different methods. So we're going to temper one on the table to do the marbling method, and we're going to temper one in either a direct method or a seeding method. If you take a piece of chocolate which is untempered and you hold it in your hands, it will melt. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to change so that when it's tempered, it won't melt inside your hands. Okay, it gives you a nice snap, a beautiful shine, and a crack to it, and that's what we're going to achieve by taking the chocolate to temper. Where we start with the dark chocolate, we're going to temper it. We're going to take it down to up to 45 to 50 degrees, and 45 to 50 degrees, all the fats inside our chocolate have melted. Then what we're going to do is we're going to bring the chocolate back down again. And we're going to do that one on the table. So we're going to pour 2/3 of our chocolate out onto the table, and we're going to temper it on the table on the marble. The marble's nice and cold. And we're going to cool that down to approximately 27, 28 degrees, okay? And then we're going to put that back into our chocolate, which is the remaining third in the bowl, which is still at the higher temperature. And then you mix it all together, and that will hopefully bring our temperature to around 32 degrees. At which point you make sure that it's properly mixed together, because you've got different temperatures. And if it's all properly mixed together, it should be beautifully tempered. At which point it should be 30 to 32 degrees. Caramelized white chocolate is slightly different. You take it to slightly different temperatures, but the process is pretty much the same if you're going to do it on the marble. We're going to do a different method, which is a seeding method, which means we're going to do it all inside a bowl. So we're going to take our chocolate up to 45 degrees. We're going to add in then 1/3 of our chocolate, approximately, to bring the temperature back down again to 28, 29 degrees. And then we're going to mix it all together, and it'll be beautifully tempered at that temperature of 29 degrees. So today I work at the Savoy Hotel, but I haven't always worked at the Savoy. My journey started many years ago now, where I was working in the West Country, where I grew up, in some local hotels and restaurants. But I kind of always knew that I was going to be drawn to London, because this is where all the big restaurants were, all the hotels were, where all the named chefs were at the time. And I moved to London in 2005, where I started working at the Mandarin Oriental. I worked in a hotel restaurant there called the Foliage, where I stayed for 4 years, and I grew, and it was my first Michelin star restaurant. It was my first big restaurant, you know. It was my first time in London, so it was quite daunting, a little bit scary, but I enjoyed the process of learning so many things so quickly, and it taught me an awful lot about being a chef. Then I moved to the Langham Hotel. I reopened the Langham Hotel, which again was a whole new process. Learning to do an opening was something which some of you may come across in your careers, but it's an experience that has to be done, and it really teaches you an awful lot about yourself and also our industry. I then joined the Mandarin Oriental again in a different role. From where before I was running the restaurant, I then went back to run the hotel as the sous chef, the pastry chef at the time. I did it a further 2 years working there, and at which point I left to join Hakkasan Group. Hakkasan Group was a real eye-opener. It was a bit different for me, going from working in fine dining, 5-star hotels to my friends didn't understand working in a Chinese restaurant, but for me, I had a bigger picture. I was working with a very great chef, and I learned a lot from him, and we took it from 5 restaurants when we first started to globally, to when we finished working there, it was ended up at 35, 40 restaurants. So it taught me an awful lot about opening restaurants, building teams, putting in consistency, and management, which was a very important part of my career. Which then brings me on to here. In 2018, I joined the Savoy, actually October 2018, so it's been 2 years now. I joined the Savoy. I had a very large team. There was a team of 32 pastry chefs working here underneath me. And we have 10 or 11 outlets inside the hotel, running from Simpsons on the Strand, which caters for 150 to 200 people a day. Casper's inside, which is our other hotel restaurant, which again does about the similar sort of numbers. You know, the hotel has 268 rooms. We're a very busy operation. You know, we do afternoon tea for up to 180 people a day, and you know, we have shops and bakery and basically everything I always wanted as a young chef. When I came to London, I wanted to work in a hotel where I could learn my trade, essentially. And I was very fortunate to work in some great hotels, but I didn't work in a hotel where I learned everything in one place. And when I joined the Savoy, that was my ambition, to make you could learn everything you wanted to in one establishment. And it's a fantastic hotel. It's a very supportive hotel. You know, they give us what we need to do our job and do our job well. So I'm very lucky to be here today. If you're going to be a pastry chef, stick with it. You know, it's a difficult trade in general. Working in kitchens, it's unsociable hours. It's a little bit intense at times, but it's all part of the journey. You need to love what you do. That's what I was told when I was a young chef. You need to love it when it's the good days, you need to love it when it's the bad days, because there'll be a mixture of both. But it's the same in any industry that you do. And I believe that if you really want to go far, you will go far. What you put into it is what you will get out of it. Nobody gave me any different opportunities than anyone else got when I was younger, but I took every opportunity that came my way and I put 110% into every single thing that I did. And luckily I was noticed for what I was doing, and I was given new opportunities to grow and to expand my knowledge and to get better. And I think that's something everyone has to understand, that give yourself time. Don't be in such a rush to run up the ladder and be the next big thing, because your career is long and you need experience before you decide you're going to take senior positions. Speaking from experience, I did it myself when I was younger. So it's important to learn your trade, understand everything about it. Don't think that old-fashioned food is old-fashioned, because even new food today, modern food, is derivative of what that was. You have to understand that before you can understand modern. And I believe that it's very important to do your time to understand that everything about classical cookery, and then you will learn as you grow older and you get more experience to put your own spin on things. And when you start to put your own spin on things, you'll start to build your own style, and then you'll start to come into your own. So like I said, give yourself time, and I think you'll go far.